All right, we're in Matthew chapter 5 tonight. We've been talking about the Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes, and the letters in red. We ended last week in verse 23 through 26, where Jesus was talking about doing something that mattered rather than a religious duty. That if you were coming to the altar in verse 23 as a for instance, and remembered that this was interesting. I thought of this afterwards. Look with me at verse 23. We'll just review it quickly and then move on. Therefore, if thou bring thy gift to the altar, and there rememberest that thy brother hath a naught against thee, leave there the gift before the altar, go thy way, and be reconciled to thy brother. Then come and offer thy gift. Sometimes I believe I've read that in the past, and maybe it doesn't make much of a difference, but if you come to the altar and remember you have something against someone, this says if you remember someone has something against you. I just thought that was the opposite of how I probably would have thought of it. If you're going to do a religious duty and you remember that you have a brother or a sister that has something against you, go and make it right with them, and then continue in speaking with the Jews. If he was here, we can use the same principle, but he was talking about their religious duties. So I just wanted to make sure I mentioned that. I even said last week that Romans 12:18 says, as much as possible, as much as lieth in you, live peaceably with all men. So as believers, we're to be peacemakers. That's been said earlier in Matthew 5. We're to try to be easy to get along with, not hard to get along with. And as much as as lies inside of us, to know that we're dealing with, this is how I take this, imperfect people. We're dealing with people that have character traits that are not desirable. What's the right word? Character defects. And so we're going to deal with people, and we have them too. So you got the best people you can come up with all have their own particular character defects. You and I have our character defects. Jesus says, and Paul echoed, as much as it lies in you, try to live peaceably with all men. And then the next verse I thought was a good one too. Agree with your adversary quickly. Elsewhere in the Bible, in the book of Proverbs, in agreement with verse 25 here, we know the principle in the Old Testament that Solomon said was a soft answer turneth away wrath. I think maybe we've all experienced that at some time or another. But grievous words stir up anger. If you fire back at someone who said something harsh to you, that's going to really ignite sometimes a much more of a fight. But if you give a soft answer, it oftentimes takes away any ammunition they have to continue the attack. Maybe they just needed to get it off their chest. Maybe they just needed to say it and they would feel better. Well, oftentimes a soft answer is our best defense. And I think the same principle here about agreeing with your adversary quickly. Jesus made it practical by saying if you didn't and didn't settle that anger, you could actually be thrown into prison if they take the matter to a judge, but more than that, you could be imprisoned in an own prison of malice and an unforgiveness. So this week, let's go on now to verse 27. This was an important one in that day. Today, it's almost scoffed at. But this, put yourself 2,000 years ago, this was very important. Ye have heard, verse 27, ye have heard that it was said of them of old, thou shalt not commit adultery. But I say unto you that whosoever looketh upon a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart. Now, this is one of those verses that I think have often been not explained, not unpacked properly, taken wrongly. God made us, both men and women, in different ways to ensure that the human race would propagate. So he gave man, for the vast majority of men, a very strong visual impulse to continue the race. We see things and we are stimulated by that with our wives, much more visually. than women are. Jesus hits at an Old Testament principle here and goes above and beyond just committing the act. He's pointing to the fact that when a heart change happens, that we won't look upon a woman and then, I believe, I've studied this over the years, try to construct ways in this particular sin of getting together with that woman. So it's not just a fleeting look. I mean, you would have to be superhuman almost, especially with the relaxed dress code that, if you even want to call it having a dress code in our society, to escape someone who is flaunting their flesh. The idea here, there wasn't, now that doesn't mean you should take every opportunity and oogle a woman, but committing adultery with her in her heart, with that person in your heart, means you're trying to think of a way and envisioning ways, that you could do that. David had to give some thought of how to get with Uriah, the Hittite's wife, in the Old Testament, Bathsheba. He had to give that some thought. It started with a look, absolutely. He went out on his balcony and saw that she was showering, and it did start with a look. But if he'd have just turned away, I say that, just turned away, she was very beautiful, he would never have proceeded then with the heart matters of trying to set him up. His lust overtook him. It went beyond just a look. And in addition to committing adultery, he added murder to his record. David did. Man after God's own heart added murder. So Jesus was saying that it's possible to commit this in our heart and in our mind. And he's using the principle and the sin of adultery. He located the origin. It was the lust of the eyes. Remember, the Bible says the lust of the eyes, the pride of life, the love of this world, all those things seek to ensnare the human heart. So this went way beyond what the Pharisees and the Sadducees were teaching. And by the way, so that we are clear, let's just have a real quick lesson on what the difference was. The Pharisees and the Sadducees were similar in that they both studied the Old Testament and they taught the Jewish people the Old Testament. Maybe you're surprised to hear this, maybe you watching at home. They were not priests. They had no priestly duties. They were almost like a social movement and a school of thought around the time of the Second Temple. They became foundational, ritualistic of rabbinic Judaism. So the Pharisees and Sadducees would study the same Old Testament that we have in our Bibles, and then they would explain to the Jewish people everything that should have been added to it. So what was the difference between them? Well, in a nutshell, the Pharisees believed in the supernatural. The Sadducees didn't. The Pharisees believed in heaven, hell, demons. The Sadducees did not. They didn't believe in any of that. Again, they weren't priests. They did not take part in the actual running of the temple. But they were self-pronounced experts on the Jewish scriptures, or what we know today to be the Old Testament. But they went beyond the scriptures themselves. They interpreted the laws and added to them. As probably the best, for instance, as an example, the Ten Commandments made it clear that God's people should not work on the Sabbath. Sounds easy enough till you ask this question: well, what is work? What would be classified as work on the Sabbath? Getting up and getting out of a chair? At the college I attended back in the 80s, we couldn't throw a softball back and forth outside the men's dorm room on Sunday because it was interpreted as it was doing work on the Sabbath. So that's the kinds of things that the Pharisees and Sadducees would argue about and add to. believe last Sunday I told a story of someone who couldn't flip a switch to get an electric current going because that would be classified as work. Now, Jesus totally blew that argument away when he was confronted by these teachers of the law, and him and his disciples were eating corn on the Sabbath, or when he healed someone on the Sabbath, and they began to attack him and chastise him for that. And he used a great example. If one of your animals would fall in a ditch during the Sabbath, you let him die, you wouldn't help him out. So that's what the Pharisees and Sadducees were. They were very similar, but they differed on the supernatural aspects of the Old Testament. The Sadducees did not believe, as I said, angels, demons. They didn't believe in angels. They didn't believe in heaven, anything like that. So the Sadducees largely practiced religion in a very secular way. They believed that this life was all there was. So I thought that was important. When Jesus is teaching, he's directly opposing what the Jewish people had been taught, not by the priests, but by these outside leaders who had given themselves a standing. The Sadducees considered themselves more aristocratic, a higher class. They thought the Pharisees were lower class. They were more connected with the common working people. So when Jesus is teaching this, remember that he's addressing some of the misteachings. And one of those was, you could just take anything about, your head turned and you glanced at a woman, you've committed adultery. Well, Jesus was saying, it was much more than that. Imagination is a God-given gift, but if it's fed by dirt in the eye, then what you'll see will be dirty. So it's important to distinguish the temptation to sin and the sin itself. The look upon a woman is supposed to be not one of just casual glance, but a persistent desire to have someone else's wife. Jesus, we're told in Hebrews chapter 4, verse 15, he endured these temptations, all of them without sin, on our behalf. He didn't yield to it. He was tempted in all points, like as we, yet with our sin. So now let's move on to the next part, because this next part too has been mistaken and misexplained, I believe. Verse 29, and if thy right eye offend thee, pluck it out and cast it from thee. For it is profitable for thee that thou should have one of thy members should perish, and that the whole body should be cast into hell. And if thy right hand offend thee, cut it off and cast it from thee. For it is profitable for thee that thou lose only a member should perish, and not that the whole body should be cast into hell. Jesus uses figurative language here. The main reason it can't be taken literally is if one of your hands were cut off, or you plucked out one of your own eyes, which by the way actually happened. One of the famous cases was an early Christian named Organ. Because of this passage and his trouble with lust, he castrated himself, taking this verse literally. Well, the problem with that is, if you cut your right hand off, or you pluck your right eye out, what's still left to sin? The other eye, the other hand, then the body, then the mind. I mean, you can't do enough self-mutilation, but that verse has been taken literally in certain time periods, and that's not, mutilation will not serve the purpose. It may prevent the outward act, but it won't extinguish the desire. Jesus was simply stressing the point that there is a willingness for us to sacrifice to be obedient, but to take that literally wouldn't make sense. The salvation of our souls to be preferred before all things, because it is precious and it is dear. But if anyone ever teaches you that was meant to be taken literally, hopefully you can see it would do no good. How about the next point here, verse 31 and 32, another often misunderstood. We're going to have to go back and put ourselves in that time period to really understand it. It has been said, whosoever shall put away his wife, let him give her a writing of divorcement. But I say unto you that whosoever should put away his wife save for the cause of fornication, causeth her to commit adultery, and whosoever shall marry her that is in divorce, that was divorced, committeth adultery. Why did he say that? Well, here's what they were doing. In Deuteronomy chapter 24, Moses said, if you wanted to divorce your wife, you needed a written, official, formal document of divorcement for a valid reason, the reason of fornication. Hey, I formally am able to divorce my wife. She has committed adultery or she has committed fornication on me. So of course, human beings, what do? We take things to the extreme. Well, it was no different. This, in Jesus' day, this Mosaic law was interpreted that almost any reason a man could divorce his wife. For burning your breakfast, women were divorced. See, I mean, so Jesus wanted to correct that because they had taken it, and the Pharisees and Sadducees would argue about it, and they write pages and pages on what it meant, to where it literally said that you could divorce your wife for just about anything. And so women were constantly having to live in fear of not pleasing their husband.